Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to continue our series on all the cars I've owned. I've owned quite a few cars for someone my age, but most of that turnover took place when I was a young 20-something-year-old, just young punk. And I didn't quite know what sort of vehicle suited me just right. So I tried all of them, basically. I went from a little German hatchback to a American-built Japanese four-door sedan to a real oldie, a 1970 Pontiac, all the way to basically owned one of every Nissan product ever made. And where we went from there, we'll talk about in a future video. But in our previous video, we talked about a 300ZX that I had bought, a 1987 300ZX. That was more of a side project, but my daily driver at the time, in 2009, was a Nissan Versa that I bought brand new in 07. I put 60,000 miles in the car, and I didn't hate it. I thought it was a great car. I really did. I don't think the Nissan hatred really started hitting until the Nissan became more, or the Versa. I'm talking about Versas here. the Versa hatred didn't really hit critical mass until the Versa became the default rental car, and it just became ubiquitous. Most of the bad experiences people have with the Versa is when they've gotten it as a rental car. But I didn't really hate the Versa that I owned. What prompted me to get rid of it was not really any of the reasons you might be thinking. It turns out I bought it because it was better in snow than a two-wheel drive Nissan pickup that I had back in 07. But it turned out, after I had moved to basically a mountain, I lived on a ski slope side condo in the mountains. And the Versa was really quite dreadful, especially in the really tough snowstorms, because my driveway, it went straight up and curved and then went back up again. And you needed momentum in that Versa to get there, and it just didn't have it. So it wasn't heavy enough, really. So I went and I started looking at used SUVs. I wasn't going to go new again. Not for the vehicle that I wanted, because there's no way I could have afforded one brand new. Not what I wanted, anyway. So at the dealer that I bought the Versa from, they had a Nissan Murano. It was a 2006 Murano, black, on black. It was the S all-wheel drive trim. So it was basically the strippy version with all-wheel drive. The asking price was around $20,000, or $19,000 I think it was. Which wasn't too bad at the time. I bought it in, now let's set the date here. I bought that in May of 2009. So I was looking on their website, and they had that one in stock, and I decided to go look at it. So I drove back to where the dealer was. I was actually home at the time. I drove back, and I asked the salesman to show me what they had, and I looked at that particular SUV. It was the 06 Murano S all-wheel drive, black on black. And the thing had about, I think it had about 62,000 miles on it. It was like low 60s. And they had an older one. They had an 05 with less miles, but I decided to go with a newer one. Now let's take a quick sidetrack here. This was at the time when Nissan, the Murano was at the end of its first generation, heading into second generation. 09, actually, the second gen had already come out by 09. Nissan's styling post-Renault merger was, in my opinion, some of their best, because it was modern, it wasn't offensive, it wasn't in your face angry, it was actually pleasant, and dare I say, stylish. I mean, you look at a first generation Murano and compare it to a second generation, I feel like they got it right the first time. The second generation, they made it more like it looked almost like a Buick. They tried to shove Nissan's corporate grille on the second gen, and it just didn't work. And every generation after that just doesn't work. But you look at the interior and the exterior of the first generation Murano, and it is actually, in my opinion, a great looking vehicle. In fact, I think it would look good on the roads today compared to today's vehicles. The only thing I didn't like about the Murano styling was the grille was a little bit too boring. I think it should have had they could have done something better with the nose. But the profile, the rear end of the vehicle, the wheels, I mean, it was just a good looking car. Especially in colors like black and silver. It's just a really nice looking rig. Anyway, so I test drove the Murano that they had, and I actually really fell in love with it. It was almost like love at first drive, you know. It had just the right, it had great handling. We took it around some corners. Acceleration was fantastic. Another thing that was really starting to plague Nissan was their decision to stick the CVT transmission into the Murano. The Murano was the test bed for the CVT in the US, and you know, the reviews were mixed. I mean, you had people who absolutely hated them, and then you had people who really liked them because they were so smooth. My take was this: I wasn't worried about how it shifted, more so because you can get used to how it shifts. My concerns with their CVTs were reliability over time, longevity. The data was all over the charts with these CVTs. They were failing early on, or they were failing towards the 100,000 mile mark. I mean, it was kind of all over the map. And in the Murano, the earlier model years, like the earlier the model year, the higher the failure rate. And that could be taken as the earlier models have more miles, but the mileage didn't seem to matter. The 04s were the worst ones. The 05s and the 06s, things started to improve. By the time 2009 came around, I think they finally figured it out. But then they realized they didn't, and they're still making improvements. The CVT reliability is still a concern for Nissan. And my personal opinion is they committed suicide by going ahead and putting them in every model they sold. They put the CVT in the lowly base model Versa and the highest spec Nissan Maxima, which in my opinion just killed the brand, and they will never recover from it. In fact, right now they're shutting down factories because nobody wants their products. It's really a sad thing, because when I was really buying into Nissan products, they really were doing well, and their design language was dead on. Now, you might disagree with me because there were some duds. For example, the 05 redesign of the Frontier, which is still in production, which is probably another reason why they're still they're in such bad shape today. It just didn't look right. That, you know what, that V-shaped grille that they did, it just doesn't work. It doesn't translate well to every body style. It's kind of like how Chevrolet, or GM in general, has been putting pickup truck front ends on Malibus and and Impalas for years, and it just doesn't work. So having one corporate face across all product lines, it just doesn't work, guys. Knock it off. And what's with these big mouth grills that looks like they want to eat people? But anyway, so Nissan wasn't really doing too badly back then. They were actually doing quite well. Carlos Ghosn did a very successful job in reversing the brand's misfortunes, only to have them run into the same problems again, but for different reasons. And that's my take on that. But anywho. So I test drove the Murano. The one that I had test driven and ultimately bought. It had so it was a stripper S model with all-wheel drive. That was the only option it had. So no fog lights. It didn't have the Bluetooth integration or nothing like that. It had the base model CD player, AM/FM CD, with no aux jack. It had cloth interior, which was pretty comfortable in my opinion. The driver's seat was power. I think it was 6-way power. It had, let's see, really nothing to write home about option-wise. Manual climate control. Really, it was a bare bones Murano, and I think the MSRP on that particular trim level was something around. I think that one sold for around 30 grand new, which back then was a lot of money. Nowadays, you can pay 30 grand for a Versa with all the options checked off. But really, what struck me about it was it had a great ride. The Nissan Murano was known. Let's focus on the good. The Murano was known well for its handling. I think it was one of the best handling SUVs in its class, and I will give it that. I will give it that. It handled very well. You could take tight corners with very little body roll. I mean, and it was quick. It had great acceleration. The CVT transmission was a weakness, but all you did, you just throw the pedal to the floor and let the transmission do the work, and it will. The V6 engine had been detuned for its application. It was the same V6 that they used in the 350Z. It was a 3.5 liter VQ35DE, I believe. And I forget the horsepower rating, but it was like 170 something horse. No, I think it was over 200 horsepower actually. I think it was. Maybe not quite. I'd have to check my numbers, but it was pretty high up there, I believe. But the one that I had, it was pretty well cared for. It had, like I said, just over 60,000 miles. It had a couple of scratches, and the rear, the C or D pillar. It had a D pillar. You could tell it had been painted. There was a little bit of you could see a paint line around the rear passenger's door frame. So it had been hit, but it didn't appear to be bad enough to cause any major damage. It didn't have a sunroof. It was a stripper, but it was pretty well equipped. Power windows, power door locks, AC, cruise. The basics. You say that, but it was the basics then. Nowadays, that's considered ultra bass. I'm going off topic. So anyway, I paid something like $20,000 for the car, and it was a fair price because it wasn't the nicest one they had. But I was happy with it. I drove it off the lot. I was driving it home, and actually, as a matter of fact, I didn't buy it on the first trip. No, what really happened was this. So I went to the dealer, I test drove the car, I sat down with a salesman, we tried to work out a deal. I said no deal, because he wouldn't give me enough for my trade-in. And I just said, you know what, I'm not going to do this. So I drove home, and then the next day after work I went back and we hashed it out a little more. I got him to come down on the price a little bit, but the numbers worked out. I was happy, and so I didn't buy it on the first run. Another little funny story though. As I was driving it home, I realized it was low on fuel. They didn't fill it, the bastards. Usually they do, but I couldn't figure out how to get the fuel door open, and I didn't have the owner's manual in the glove box. I didn't have a smartphone back then, so I was like, how the hell do I put gas in this? I'm looking all over for a fuel door release, and there wasn't one. I actually had to call the dealer from my Motorola flip phone, and he said, oh yeah, just press on the gas door and it'll pop open. So that was fun. Couldn't get gas in the damn thing. Anyway. What I liked about the Murano was not only the handling, but it was very versatile. It had plenty of cargo space for me, and I actually used it, I hauled my friends around in it, It was very comfortable. It sat all of us, well, at least 5 of us, in pretty decent comfort. The rear seats would recline. I thought that was kind of nice. But it was just, it was a decent vehicle for what it was. Now here's where things turned for the worse. And this is why it was the last Nissan I'll ever buy. One of the things I didn't realize with the Versa, even though I had some issues with it, was just how bad Nissan had become quality-wise. They weren't engineering their cars to last anymore. And it was being painfully evident in the Murano. I thought being a Murano, it would have been, it's a more expensive vehicle, it would have been built better. Well, that wasn't the case. That car was built very poorly. In fact, I have a couple of videos of that car on my channel right now that you can watch from when I had it. And before I had it, in a manner of speaking. So within, I bought it with about 65,000 or so, I forget the mileage. By the time it hit 100,000 miles, or shortly after, I started having problems. And they started innocently enough. The sun visor, for example, it kept falling down. The clutches that hold them in place would wear out. And this is common, actually, for all Nissans at the time. So I'm thinking, well, no big deal, I'll just buy a new sun visor. And then I found out how much a sun visor costs. I actually got into an argument with somebody on a forum over this. They're like, why don't you go to the junkyard and get one? Well, genius, if every Nissan sun visor, if used as intended, develops a problem where the clutches fail inside the sun visor, buying one from a junkyard will do what for me? I'll be spending money on another sun visor that is probably 3/4 of the way through its lifespan and will do the same damn thing. So in this case, the only solution was to buy one new at the dealer. That's the only place I could get a new one. Okay. The dealer charged me $350 for that sun visor. $350. Damn. Anyway. But hey, whatever. It was fixed. I was happy. Everybody happy. Okay. The second thing that had happened to it, by the time it hit about 102,000 miles, or a little over 100,000 miles, I noticed that the engine would make a rattling sound upon startup. And it started off like a very dull rattling, but it started to get a little worse. So I looked into it. As it turns out, Nissan hadn't really quite figured out how to make timing chain guides. Apparently it's hard. So the deal was, eventually, the timing chain guides would completely fail and get jammed into one of the timing gears. Yeah, that's where we were in 2004 technology. We forgot how to make timing chains, or we never learned how to make them to begin with. So that was a ticking time bomb. Problem number 3. This actually happened shortly after I bought the car. I noticed that under periods of very light acceleration, I would hear like a bzz noise coming from the engine compartment. I never really thought anything of it until I read a forum post from a guy who had a Maxima, which had the same drivetrain, same engine mount. Turns out Nissan used a fairly over-engineered engine mount that consisted of, it was a liquid damper inside this rubber concoction, and it was valved. So the theory is, it's actually kind of genius, but when the car is idling, like in traffic, no accelerator application, the engine's just idling, the motor mounts were designed, they were motorized, and they would loosen up. So they would allow the engine to rock a little bit more. And that would absorb the vibration of the engine while you're idling, so you can't feel it as much. And then when you press on the accelerator a little bit, just a little bit, the motor inside would immediately close the valving in the motor mount, which would stiffen it up so it wouldn't, you know. The problem with those motor mounts is that when they fail, and they do, it takes the entire ECU with it. So you could be driving along fancy free, blah, 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 and then all of a sudden your little fancy hydraulic motor mount would short circuit and blow the ECU. It's genius. That was just one more thing I had to worry about with this car. I'm like, great, just awesome. You know, I took out a loan to buy this thing because I was a broke-ass young kid, and that's what everybody does. That's what people do. They don't buy cars with cash. It's nice if you can. I mean, I've done it many times. I bought this cash. I bought my other car with cash. But sometimes you can't. You need a vehicle, or you need to replace a vehicle, and you don't have 20 grand sitting in the bank to buy something relatively modern. Because that's what used cars cost now, 20 grand for something that's relatively modern and doesn't need repairs. It's not a hard and fast rule, but that's what I've found. Anyway, it gets better. So the other thing that I found out was that, they hadn't quite fixed the CVT problems in the Murano. They hadn't quite figured it out yet, and oh, by the way, it could fail at any time. And that prompted Nissan to extend their warranty on the transmission to about, I think it was 120,000 miles, or some arbitrary time. I think it was 8 years, 120,000, something, 10 years maybe. Anyway. So the transmission warranty was extended, but oh crap, my car already had 110,000 on it by the time I found out about it. Transmission was still working fine, but it was starting to act up like the Versas did. It would just shift funny. Like you could tell something was up. Something wasn't right. It was starting to wear out. So I had the transmission serviced just as a goodwill measure. Like, I'm trying to make this vehicle last so that if I ever do need to make a warranty claim, they can't say you didn't service it. It was really to cover my own ass. So I brought it to the dealer. It was like $600. Now, this was at a time when you couldn't go to Advanced Auto Parts and buy CVT fluid. It was not an option. So you couldn't really bring it anywhere. There was no place to bring it other than the dealer, because you know damn well they don't have the right stuff in stock. Nowadays, CVT fluid isn't made from unicorn blood anymore. You can buy it anywhere. But that wasn't true back then. They were still a relatively new idea, and most shops wouldn't touch them anyway because of the liability. A CVT transmission in a Nissan Murano at the time was a $6,000 repair. And they were not rebuildable back then. Now they are, I believe. But things have changed. This was then, now is now. So, anyway, I'm just in my head, I'm thinking, all right, if this transmission fails under my ownership, I'm screwed. Because it's going to fail after the warranty's up, clearly. I have a loan on this thing, and I'm just like, it was really giving me a headache. And it was already showing some signs of something's not right. But not enough to file a warranty claim, because I brought it to the dealer and they found nothing wrong, naturally. But it gets better. So I'm driving along, and I notice it's making a funny noise, and it was like a crunching sound, like a rah, rah, rah. It was under the car, towards the center. Did some homework on the forums. Oh, that's the sound your transfer case makes when it's about to grenade. So I'm like, what the hell? It was a weird sound. And I didn't think much of it until I casually found a post about this transfer case noise. As it turns out, your fancy Nissan Murano that's just 3 years old, it was only 3 years old, is notorious for transfer case failures. And as an added bonus, when your transfer case fails, it takes the CVT with it, turning a $4,000 repair job to a $10,000 repair job, parts and labor. Oh my god. Oh, so anyway, I did call some scrapyards looking for parts. Not one scrapyard in my area had one or could get parts for one. Why? And I asked, why are there no Muranos in the junkyards? What's going on? Well, as it turns out, there was a hot market for Nissan Murano chassis and carcasses and parts in Europe. So they were buying them in American auctions, the insurance auctions, and shipping them overseas. That's what I was told. I don't know if it's true. Can you verify it? Let me know. Oh my god. This vehicle was just a nightmare, and at this point, I want to get rid of it. I want it gone. I didn't care how. And then I'm driving home one day. I had a long, hard day at work. Just one of those days. It happens. Driving along on my 45-minute commute, rocking out to some tunes, and then poof, the driver's seat collapsed. You heard me. Collapsed. So I'm like, shit. You know, I'm about ready to lose control because I'm on back roads in the country cruising at 35 miles an hour. I pull the car over. I look at the seat frame. The whole, one of the brackets just snapped. I'm like, you son of a bitch. Just if I didn't need any more problems with this car. So, it's funny. I knew this would happen because again, forum posts. Probably every other person on that forum had this happen at some point or another. So anyway, I was looking at how to fix this, and the only so I tried welding it, alright? I welded it 2 or 3 times. You know, my dad's got a welder, he let me use it. And what would happen was, I would weld it, and it would break somewhere else. I'd weld it there, and then it would break in another spot. Clearly, the whole bracket was just fatigued, and it just wasn't the right material, wasn't the right thickness, wasn't the right application. Real nice job, Nissan. And the only solution, because again, junkyards don't have them, and if they did, we'd have the same problem, only you've just paid money for another one that's going to break in 5 minutes. You got to understand the logic behind systemic failure. It happens. It's a thing, you know. If let's say you've got a vehicle that has a head that's notorious for cracking in half or something like that at, 40,000 miles, you're going to go to the junkyard and you're going to buy another head that's got 35,000 miles on it, and it's going to break in 5,000 miles. I mean, is it really worth it? No. That's why you go and you find a new one or a certified, warranted one or some shit. Anyway, so my only option at the time, because welding failed it, I could not get it to stay, was to go to the dealer, shell out, it was $800 on a freaking seat frame. And there's a video on my channel somewhere on how I did this. So I bought the seat frame, put it in, problem solved. And just a few months later, or very, very shortly thereafter, Dorman is a company that produces parts to solve problems that manufacturers cause. Sometimes they buy parts directly from the manufacturer and resell them, but sometimes they re-engineer parts themselves to solve a problem that the manufacturer caused. It's pretty cool, their business model. Well, Dorman now makes a replacement part for the seat that solves the problem. It'll never happen again if you buy the, supposedly, it permanently fixes the seat frame. And I forget the part and what it looked like, but it was a replacement for the part that broke, and it was improved somehow. So if you have a Nissan Murano, I'm sorry, first of all. But secondly, there is a solution that does not involve a new seat frame. And also, I'm sure there are some Muranos in the junkyards now. So, congratulations. I bet you that's where mine is right now. Anyway, so that wasn't the final straw. No. So I think it was about a couple months later. We're heading into the winter, early December 2000, and actually it was November 2010. I didn't have the car very long. No, 2011. I had about 2 years. November 2011. I'm driving home. I'm driving to work in the morning, and my heater just decides to quit. It just won't turn on now. Great. More problems. Yay. I love my Murano. Handle's great. Anyway, so the heater quit. No blower at all. It's all digitally controlled, by the way, so you know. Thing cranked. Now, it caught me off guard because it was an automatic climate control system to an extent, but it was manual. Actually, I don't remember. It was automatic in this car, wasn't it? It was automatic. My mistake. It was automatic. I misspoke there. But anyway, what it would do is when the coolant temperature was low, the blower would stay off, and then when the coolant temperature rose gradually, it would come on in steps until it reached the set point for whatever, you know. That's just how it worked. In fact, my new my Hyundai Santa Fe does the same thing, only it works. Well, this one didn't. So I wasn't really thinking much, but I'm noticing my temperature gauge is up and the climate control's not producing heat. So I manually you can override it by turning the blower speed up. I did that and nothing happened. So, and then I whacked the dashboard and it came on. Like, great, I got heat again. And then it stopped. So I was thinking at the time that there was maybe a crack in the... So there's a couple of circuit boards behind the dashboard. One of them is an amplifier board. It takes a low voltage signal, converts it to a high voltage signal, and trips a relay, which turns the blower on. So I took that board out, and I'm looking over the board for any cracked solder joints. I even refloated in the oven, and it didn't work. So I'm thinking the amplifier board is gone at this point. So I just kind of forgot about it, and a couple days later, it worked for a little while, then it stopped again, and I was like, what the hell? But anywho, then I realized I needed tires. So we're heading into winter, I need tires. Snow's going to be coming soon, I got to get tires. Let's put the heat on hold for now. Let's get some tires. So I go to the tire place, and they quoted me $1,000 for a set of tires. Now, it turns out the Murano used, at the time when it came out, it was a unique tire size that wasn't common. It was a fairly rare tire size, and only like one or two other vehicles used them. So that means supply is low. Only 2 manufacturers made tires for this car. And they were both very expensive. The Goodyear tires, mounted and balanced, were about $1,000, and they weren't really lasting me. I think I put about 30,000 miles on them, and they were friggin' gone. So I went to go price out tires. I'm looking at about $1,000 for tires. And there was another one. I think it was the Korean tire maker. It wasn't Otsu. It was. I forget the name of the brand. But Hyundai uses them as OEM suppliers. Anywho, so there was those, and they were a little bit cheaper, but still quite expensive. I needed all 4. Now, when you have an all-wheel drive vehicle, you have to replace all 4 at the same time. You're supposed to rotate them so they wear evenly, and then you replace them at the same time. If you don't do this, if you replace 2 tires only on an all-wheel drive setup, you run the risk of basically destroying the transfer case. And that actually happens. It really does happen. And it's not just a Hyundai thing or a Nissan thing or a Toyota thing or a Subaru thing. all-wheel drive vehicles, you must do all 4 tires at the same time, and you must rotate them on a regular basis. And that is to reduce the amount of wear and tear on the all-wheel drive system. You can cause very expensive failures by not doing that. Anyway, knowing this, and knowing that I'm facing a potential, it was a $500 part to fix the heater, I was like ready to throw in the towel. I had just put brakes on this car. I did them myself, and they were the only reason I was planning on even thinking about putting money into this thing, because I put a lot of money into the brakes. They were very expensive, more than I've ever paid for brakes on any car I've ever owned. What a pile, man. So I brought it to, got the price on the tires, and I got a price to fix the heating system. At that point, I just said, you know what, I'm done. I'm done with this car. It is costing me my sanity. It is costing me money, a lot of money. And there's no end in sight, because once a car reaches a certain mileage, that and the timing chain guides were a grenade waiting to go off. So it was like, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not putting thousands of dollars into this piece of crap that Nissan engineered very poorly, and continues to, a legacy they're continuing to this day, it seems, because people aren't really happy with them, which is why they're not really selling anymore. On my way home from work that day, I was on my way to the dealership to buy the part to fix the heater because I needed a defroster. I needed heat, man. And I ended up taking a detour into the Hyundai dealership, where I said goodbye to my beloved Nissan forever, and I will never touch another one again. I switched to Hyundai products, and I'm never looking back. And that's my story with the Nissan Murano. It was a tale that started out hopeful. I was happy with the vehicle. I really loved that Murano. For the first 10, 15,000 miles I owned it. And I thought maybe the occasional failure was just, hey, whatever, nobody's perfect. The sun visor broke. Oh, the seat frame broke. Oh no. But then it just started escalating from there into major driveline issues that weren't failures yet. The thing, don't let me get you wrong, or don't get me wrong. It never stranded me. But it's knowing the warning signs and how these vehicles break down that led to the decision that I made, and knowing that there were pending failures just around the corner. And I didn't mention, the catalytic converters were bad too. No, really. It's like this thing was a money pit. So, shortly after I got rid of it, the engine light came on. I pulled the scan tool out of my toolbox. I plugged it in. It was a catalytic converter inefficiency code. Nissans are notorious for this. But there's a little evil side effect here. Another thing about these Muranos, and most Nissan, I know the 2.5 liter 4-cylinders had this problem. If the pre-catalytic converter starts to fail, it can break up into chunks, and through the EGR system, the exhaust gas recirculation system, which is just upstream from the catalytic converter, or I guess maybe it's downstream. I think it's one or the other. I think it's probably upstream. What will happen is it can suck up chunks of catalytic converter into the combustion chambers, and score the cylinder walls, which would require a complete engine replacement, or at least a short block. Yeah, this really happens. And I believe it was also an issue on their V6s. But one thing's for certain, Nissan has had catalytic converter problems for decades. And I was one of those people who would have had to have replaced them. I had to reset that engine light like 3 times. I just kept resetting it. I'm like, I can't afford to put catalytic converters in this thing now, because I just put $1,000 into the seat, or this, or that, or this. Catalytic converters, there's 3 of them in a V6. You've got one pre-cat per side, and then you've got the main one in the middle, on the bottom of the car. And I don't know which one was bad. But if it was one of the pre-cats, I'd have to replace them both, because they're both at the same point in their lifespan. Oh my god, that car was a piece of shit. I am so glad it's gone. The happiest day of my life was the day I drove it into the used car lot at the Hyundai dealership and handed them the keys and said, "I'll take something else, thank you." I didn't get much for my trade-in. They knew what was up. I mean, they know the Muranos pretty well. I'm sure they get a lot of them. People are trading them in on Santa Fe's. The Santa Fe was a far better product. And the Murano was built in Japan. It's like, you can't make this shit up. But that's what happened to my poor Murano, and that's why it's gone. And I still have the videos up, by the way, and I'm not taking them down. I make a lot of money in those videos. They're some of my highest viewed videos of all time. Specifically the Murano videos. I don't know why, but every time somebody comments on those videos, I always rebuke their comment and say, "Don't buy this vehicle. I do not buy these." I get people still asking me to this day, "Should I buy a 2006 Murano?" No. No, you should not. Do not buy a 2000. Don't buy any Murano. Don't do that to yourselves, because they are garbage. I don't see a lot of those first-gen Muranos on the road anymore, and I can imagine why. I saw a video of a guy, it's, I think it was DeBoss Garage, I think it is. He's up in Canada, I believe. He did a video where he had a friend who bought a Murano at an auction. Not a salvage auction, I don't think, but he bought it at an auction. And he ended up having to put a transmission he ended up doing something to it. Either a transmission or an engine. He replaced the engine, then the engine failed again, then he put a transmission in it, the transmission failed 3 more times. It was like a never-ending saga of, it needs this, it needs this, it needs that, now it needs this, now this is broke again. It's like, scrap them. Bury them in the desert next to the ET cartridges. That's where they belong. Muranos are garbage. And I go out on a limb here and say, while they were okay brand new, any Nissan made after the Renault merger is now garbage. The Versas are blowing engines left and right, transmissions are failing in them. They were just a lemon from the start, and Altimas are no better. I mean, you got Altimas catching fire, you've got... I watched another video. The Altimas from that generation, the floor pans are rotting out of them. Just completely rotting out. For no reason. Just totally rotting out. They were a great automaker. They had promise. And now they're furloughing employees for 3 days because they can't make payroll. How do you go from the top to the bottom so quickly? Well, I guess I blame it on CVTs, because the CVT transmission has alienated any enthusiast buyer, and they've been plagued with reliability problems. The Jatco CVTs have been plagued with reliability issues since day one, and yet they still continue to use them. It doesn't make any sense. Oh well. I'm going to enjoy my Hyundais because I love them. They're reliable. They're safe. Yeah, I love them. No car's perfect. No automaker's perfect. But you got to kind of pick your battles. Yeah. And on that note, I think we're going to call it a night. Thank you all for watching. My next video will be about the time I traded in the Murano for something a little bit, well, quite down market from what I had. Totally different. A 180 degree turn from what I had. It couldn't have been more different. And on that note, I'm out of here.